like to call to order the April 5th, 2017 special meeting. If everyone would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Mills, resolutions.
We have a procedural resolution there, 9517, amending resolution 3517, authorizing a contract award to Jeffrey Lair, Redevelopment Council, amending the fund account from legal other expense to developers escrow.
Do I have a motion for 9517?
Offer it, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Johnson? Yes. Ms. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mayor Sister?
Yes. And Mr. Mills, ordinance for public hearing and final consideration, please.
Yes, it is entitled an ordinance of the Township of Morris, New Jersey, recommending the adoption of the redevelopment plan regarding the former Colgate Palmetto property, identified on the Township tax map as Block 10401, Lot 3, common address 191 East Hanover Avenue, pursuant to the local redevelopment and housing law. Citation as noted, and I would ask now that you call for a motion in a second, and then ask Mr. Phillips before there's a vote to explain, and then of course you have the public hearing.
Do I have a motion for
I would offer
2017?
ordinance number 10, that's 17, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
At this point, we will open up the portion for public hearing. Mr. Phillips, would you please come and explain? Yes, Mr. Phillips is our Morris Township planner and author of this redevelopment plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So again, what the Township Committee is considering this evening is an adoption of a redevelopment plan for the former Colgate property located on Hanover Avenue. Just to recap, after a public hearing, as you know, the planning board conducted the planning board and their recommendation, the Township Committee declared this area in need of redevelopment. The next step, consistent with the redevelopment, the state redevelopment statute, is to prepare and adopt a redevelopment plan. The Township Committee directed that the planning board prepare that document. It is now before you and for second reading and a public hearing. Essentially, the plan is providing for a mixed-use development that would include a combination of retail and commercial uses along the property frontage on East Hanover Avenue, as well as predominantly for sale market rate townhouses on the balance or towards the rear portion of the tract. The tract itself is just under 50 acres. There would also be an affordable housing component, which would include both a multifamily rental building as well as a small group home. All of those units would help the township to satisfy a portion of its fair share housing obligation. I know that the Township Committee doesn't have prior experience with redevelopment plans. I've drafted numerous for municipal clients. It's a much more detailed document, as you see, than it's conventional zoning. It's actually a 25-page document, and it goes into traditional zoning standards as well as a lot of other standards, including design standards and guidelines, with the real goal is to assure that you ultimately end up with the highest quality project possible. And again, all of this is authorized under the redevelopment statute. Just very briefly, I'm not going to go through, I'll tell you everything that's in the document, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. But everything from basically highlighting the statutory basis for the plan, description of the site and boundaries, which you're familiar with. You're familiar with the history of the property through its ownership of Menon and then Colgate. We list a series of redevelopment plan goals and objectives. I think we have 8 goals and objectives, some of which I described: to provide affordable housing, to transform an obsolete manufacturing plant into a productive use, to basically to come up with the most appropriate redevelopment scheme that's in the best interest of the municipality, to replace what had been a significant tax rateable for the municipality over the years. Relationship to the Township Master Plan. On Monday evening, the Planning Board adopted an amendment to the land use element of the Master Plan, basically changing the designation of this property to basically mirror what is in the redevelopment plan. So this document is now entirely consistent with your master plan documentation. We go through typical land use and bulk standards, permitted uses such as in the retail, restaurants, retail sales, health fitness clubs, offices, hotels. All of these are permitted within the retail commercial component. I mentioned the types of residential dwellings that are allowed in the residential open space component. There's a maximum FAR, typical in zoning for the retail commercial. The maximum density, I think this is important on the residential open space component, is 6 dwelling units per acre, which was sort of modeled after your TH6 zone, which that's where we got the density. As I mentioned, a 20% set aside for affordable units. We have bulk requirements, just like a zoning ordinance, setback standards, distance between building standards. We have requirements for the townhouses in terms of the number of units per townhouse, so that it doesn't become a sort of monotonous row of barracks with all the same number of units. Again, basically the goal to have the highest quality development. Parking, loading standards, typically found in a zoning ordinance. And we have a whole series of design standards, which you can do in a redevelopment plan, and it's focused more on the commercial portion to make sure that the buildings are attractive, that there's articulation, you don't have long, massive facades without vertical and horizontal breaks and changes in materials and fenestration and so forth. We talk about the type of materials that are preferred. We basically come up with signage standards which are fairly limiting. We didn't want there to be an excess of signage, so they're fairly limiting standards. We have landscaping and berming standards. One of the key parts of the plan is we're requiring a significant landscape berm between the commercial portion and the residential portion, essentially to afford the new residents protection from whatever adverse influences there might be from the retail commercial. There's a requirement for a walking trail, so we have pedestrian connectivity. That's basically on the residential side and also goes out to East Hanover. There is the recreation fields that exist. The plan provides that they be relocated to another location within the redevelopment area, and the actual size of the recreation fields are spec'd in the plan. There are other landscaping requirements. There's a front landscape buffer requirement, so you have some visual relief before you see the parking areas from Hanover Avenue. There's lighting standards. The statute requires us to show that we are consistent with the adjacent municipalities' master plans. And we have Hanover directly across the street. We have Morristown basically to the rear. And interestingly enough, this plan is consistent because Hanover is a commercial district and they have recently introduced retail, which our frontage would be consistent with what's being developed across the street in Hanover. And Morristown basically designates their land for single family. So our transition to townhouses provides for an appropriate transition to the lands that are zoned and designated in the master plan for single family residential. State plan consistency, we're in planning area 1, metropolitan planning area. State plan says targeted for growth. Here's where we're putting the new growth within the township. There are redevelopment actions per statute, which are outlined. What's important here, no property acquisition required as part of this redevelopment plan, no relocation required. Again, it was a non-condemnation relocation area. The redeveloper who comes in will have to come to the planning board, normally as they do with any zoning for site plan and subdivision. There are provisions for deviation requests, just like a variance, although importantly, there is no opportunity for a developer to seek a D variance, go to the zoning board to sort of circumvent the plan. He'd have to come back to you to amend the plan to do anything that's not allowed, or rise it to the level of a D variance, either a D height, a D density, or a D floor area ratio requirement. There's procedures for amending the plan, there's duration of the plan, a 30-year duration, and there are statutory requirements that we have to be consistent with, and we just kind of recite them to make sure that we are consistent. And at the very end, we provide some conceptual illustrations and photo examples in terms of what we would envision both the residential component and the retail component to look like, to provide a guide to the planning board ultimately when a redeveloper comes in for site plan approval. So that gives you, I think, some indication of what's in the plan, and if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. I think I'll